Welcome back. This is lecture 4. We are in module 1 and this is lecture 4 module 1. In this lecture we have we will be looking at some other theories, other modern day scholars. So, in the previous lectures we have traced the history of social learning of language or social origin of language in many domains, starting with sociolinguistics, and we went on to sociology and other disciplines. So, today we will look at some of the modern day scholars and how the similar kind of understanding, similar kind of theories have been proposed by many modern day scholars and also from few more diverse fields, like we will also look at Mark Pagel, who is a evolutionary biologist. We will also look at Daniel Everett, and today's lecture we will complete with the social origin of language workshop that was held in 2011, which brought together a number of important scholars to talk about or discuss and find the future course of action on this particular domain itself. So, it is an important landmark workshop. So, we will talk about that as well. So, we will start with Mark Pagel. Now, the entire idea of Pagel's theory is based on the evolutionary aspect of human species as in the Homo sapiens. So, how is it that we have come to the current condition, what are the most important parameters and what role language plays within that is what is Pagel's point of departure. So, he has a very interesting take on this. So far we have seen that language and society go hand in hand, they influence each other, there is a lot of interaction happening. According to Pagel, language is a dangerous and powerful tool, one of the important tools that has created modern society, modern human society as it is today. So, his argument is that language evolved with humans and it is unique to humans, and that to the Homo sapiens. He does not attribute this capacity to the other varieties of for example, the Homo erectus or the Neanderthals. He does not give this capacity, attribute this capacity to them. It is only the Homo sapiens who has this particular ability. Thus, it distinguishes us from our close cousins as well as close cousins like chimpanzees and other higher primates, as well as our own relatives like Neanderthals. So, language is profoundly intertwined with human society, acting both as a driver and as a consequence of human actions and social development. That is how he puts it. So, it is a driver as well as a consequence of social development of human, that is part of human evolution. So, to highlight the idea of the power of language in order to create societies, he goes back to the story, the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. So, this the story many of you already probably know, that the humans became so powerful that they started creating a big tower to reach God, and God felt threatened, and then he cursed them and people started speaking different languages and the tower was not built. So, the idea here he interprets it as a the power of language, because till this happened, till the God's wrath came in, till then people spoke only one language. So, because they could communicate with each other, because they could cooperate with each other, they could become so powerful that even God had to take notice. That is how he puts it. So, the biblical story of the Tower of Babel illustrates this, that humans sharing a single powerful language could work together and cooperate to build a tower powerful enough. So, the destruction of the tower and the shattering of people with separate languages were intended to prevent from working together again. So, thereby he underlines the power of humans to work together, which is one of his most important, his closest ideas to his theory is the cooperation among the humans. So, cooperation and language going hand in hand and thereby creating a powerful species. So, our species rose around 200,000 years ago, that is his calculation, and developed social learning, something that is attributable only to Homo sapiens is social learning. That is also his idea, not many agree of course, but his idea is that the Homo sapiens were the first ones who had social learning. Now, what is social learning? He gives this very interesting example that social learning is like what one person can learn from another person. So, within the same community we can learn from each other. So, I might know X, you might know Y. So, you have a chance to, I have a chance to learn Y from you and you have a chance to learn X from me. This is how human society works. So, each of us are capable of learning from the others achievement as well as others mistakes. So, this is what is primary factor about social learning. Now, social learning is something that distinguishes us from our fellow human species like Homo erectus and Neanderthals. In fact, in one of his very well known talks, he describes it as we might be gone, we as in humans, Homo sapiens like we are today, we might be gone for 1,000,000 years and we can come back and see that the chimpanzees are still using the sticks to get termites, to eat termites, and using the same stones to break the same kind of nuts. So, they do not have the social learning capacity. So, they have not learned from watching others. And the same thing he talks about Homo erectus as well, that all the fossils that we have got from Homo erectus had same kind of handheld tools. There was no development in the tools, that is what he talks about. But Homo sapiens are different because we have developed over the course of time, we have developed very rapidly. So, this is the one reason that we develop rapidly is social learning. However, social learning is not all good. It also has a not so positive side, which he calls visual theft. Now, if we can learn from one another, we can also steal from one another. So, that is what visual theft is all about. So, we can steal from other people just by looking at it, looking at how they are doing something. We can learn and do it better or do it before the other person and all that. So, our ancestors must have faced this dilemma. Long back they must have faced this dilemma, and then how did they get over this dilemma? What did they do? That is where language comes in. That is what his most important theory is all about, Pegel's theory. So, social learning, because it has a negative side, because you can learn from each other, you can also steal from each other. Now, how to create a situation, how to create a scenario which will override this possibility of visual theft. In his terms, this is where the idea of mutual cooperation comes in. So, exploit cooperation. So, if you cooperate rather than compete with one another, then we have a chance of as a society, as a collective, we have the chance of doing better than we have done before. So, that is how he puts it. So, language evolved to solve this crisis of visual theft, and language is that tool which can be utilized for creating cooperation across members of the community. So, language is a piece of social technology to enhance the benefit of cooperation. That is where language and society come together in Pegel's theory. He says that not only this helps us create cooperation, as a result of which we have a sense of collective. So, as a sense of community, so we can eventually thrive. Now, while doing this, language also helps us create identities. Language, one language, one community. So, each language can be identified with a community. Now, this is something you can see that this is similar to the ideas proposed by others also before. So, he connects the dots between he bridges the gap between the disciplinary boundaries, says that this is also one way of creating identity. So, not only we create cooperating groups, but also create another thing that we do is not only we create identities, but we also create divisions. This is something very integral to identities. The moment you create an identity marker for members of a particular community, at the same time you always demarcate them as separate from the neighboring community. He gives a very interesting example that from some places on earth, earth, he goes about talking as to how there are some places in the world which is actually geographically very small, but has a very high degree of high number of languages spoken. He talks about Papua New Guinea, for example. It is a tiny island nation and it has many languages. It is a large number of languages within a very short area. So, his idea is that the reason why a small area has such a high number of languages is because languages help us ring around our cooperative, puts a ring around our cooperative groups in order to protect our knowledge, wisdom and skills from eavesdropping. So, theft and eavesdropping are his the problems that apparently humans have, and that is why language creates groups, language creates cooperation, and that group also helps from protects one from the neighboring group. So, in other words, it creates distinct identity. So, in his work he has focused on the what he calls a secret weapon of our species, which is cooperation. So, the secret weapon, why is it a weapon? Because this is what distinguishes us from our close cousins like Homo erectus and Neanderthals, as well as our primate cousins. So, this is something that makes us distinctly separate and distinctly unique, as well as a developed group, because we have thrived so well because of cooperation. Now, this is where language comes in. So, as society progressed and we indulged in social action, the tool that helped in us in exchange of ideas, striking deals and coordinating activities was language. Thus, language along with other factors is integral to social dimension as well as development of the human species as well. So, not just that, he says that language also watches our social behavior. He talks about taboos and the various kinds of censoring system that we have across the world. All of this also has to do with language. So, had language not been powerful, socially powerful, this would not have been the case. So, that is what he gives as an example of his, as a proof of his theory. And then he also brings in other ideas, all of these put together. He says these are the things that promote the replicator's interest. So, language and other systems. For example, he talks about the feature of language that makes this so unique, makes it so effective as a tool for doing whatever he considers that we do with language. So, one feature is that the compositionality. So, language operates, he calls it digitally, using discrete chunks. So, chunks as in words. So, that can be endlessly combined and recombined into new forms. So, this is something that is compositionality, one of the basic features of human language. So, this particular feature is what makes it useful. And along with this, we also had other things going in our favor, for example, rapid brain expansion. So, over the last 2 million years, the human brain has undergone an extraordinarily rapid increase in size. This metabolically, this is because once you have a bigger brain, the metabolic cost rises. So, according to Pagel, because we have a exponentially, suddenly there was so much of growth of the human brain. Now, this incurs a metabolic cost. So, the effect as a result, the benefit must have been bigger than the metabolic cost. So, the higher metabolic cost, he says that accounting for 20% of basal metabolism, suggesting it must provide significant advantage. That advantage is language, that advantage is mutual cooperation, social learning and so on. FOXP2 gene is another important actor in this entire game of evolution, human evolution. So, there have been a lot of debate about the role of FOXP2 in creating language in humans. A whole debate is there about the language evolution. One group believes that it is FOXP2 gene that makes us capable of speaking, but later findings suggest that many other primates also do share the same gene, maybe in a slightly different format, but they do share. So, but recent research indicates that humans regulate and express their FOXP2 gene differently, affecting at least 61 other genes. So, even though Neanderthals have also been found to have some traces of FOXP2, in case of humans, the functioning of the gene is different because it affects 61 more other genes. So, as a result, this difference in regulation is a key reason why he believes that Pagel believes Neanderthals did not have language. Similarly, symbolic thinking, which is typical of humans. So, humans demonstrate a profound capacity for symbolic thinking that is absent in Neanderthals and other species. So, about 40,000 years ago, humans were creating extraordinary sculptures like the Venus figurines. He gives all these examples, the landman and intricate cave art and so on and so forth. So, all these are indicators of symbolic thinking, the something stands for something else. So, you draw draw X, you have a cave art, this has the capacity to give you the entire story to whoever is the audience. So, this is symbolic the capacity of symbolic thinking. Now, this level of symbolic expression suggests a rich non-literal existence in contrast to the more plodding and literal existence he attributes to Neanderthals. So, he gives all of these examples to show that there was a marked difference in the evolutionary structure, evolutionary paradigm between the Neanderthals and Homo erectus and the Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens has all of these things going in their favor, and eventually language also arose out of all of that. And then comes the theory of mind. He does not attribute theory of mind to other species. Theory of mind is an understanding that the humans, almost all typically developing children will develop theory of mind by the age of typically by the age of 4 to 5. Now, what is theory of mind? Theory of mind basically is the understanding, fundamental understanding that each human has their own way of understanding the world, looking at the world, analyzing the world, as well as the behavioral output because of those ways of thinking. That is one. Similarly, other individuals will also have their own state of mind, own behavioral output and so on. So, primarily this relates to the understanding of who you are and who other person is, and the fundamental relation between us, ourselves and others is that they might be different. This is something that is very crucial and one of the building blocks for our social behavior. Now, this is not attributable as per Pagel to other our close cousins. This is something that is typically human. So, all of these came together to create the social being that we are, and language has been an integral part of it. So, symbolic thinking also is connected to language, because language ultimately is a symbolic structure. So, we are capable of using the compositionality as a parameter of language, which is a symbolic structure, to give voice to our theory of mind, basically to whatever we are thinking and how we want to seek the cooperation of another person, and how do we go about as a community. All of these are together. And then he says that not only the language evolved out of all this kind of necessity and this kind of a system, we also have sculpted language. What does it mean? Humans actively sculpted language to serve their interests. So, words as cultural objects transmitted from mind to mind rather than genetically undergo a form of natural selection. So, which words get transferred, which words get used more, all of these are also part of a broader natural selection process. So, the vast majority of possible words are typically not used. Instead, humans have selected a tiny rarefied subset. A subset of all the possible words are used all the time. That is what he says. Frequently used words are demonstrably shorter and easier to pronounce, having fewer obstruents. That is how he puts it. So, sounds that obstruct the airways. So, there is, even among all the words that we have created in any language, there is a subset that we constantly use, and which go through a natural selection because they have certain properties, like they are easier to pronounce, they have they are shorter and so on. Thus, language is not merely a tool for communication, but a self-interested piece of social technology. That is how Mark Pagel puts it. So, in essence, language is a powerful form of compositional communication, arose in humans due to unique combination of brain development, genetic changes, symbolic thought and the ability to attribute mental state to others. So, this is how language became a driver for human expansion, human development and cultural innovation and so on. That is where we leave Pagel and then move on to Daniel Everett. Another important scholar in this domain who talks about language and culture and ethnology connection as to how the language is actually a cultural tool. His book, in his many books, he talks about this idea that language is a cultural tool. So, but then he differs slightly from Pagel in the timeline. So, he attributes language to Homo erectus. He says that language probably began with the Homo erectus instead of Homo sapiens, who already engaged in cooperative hunting. So, he does attribute some amount of cooperation among the Homo erectus as well. So, they had cooperative behavior, fire control, tool use and all that he attributes to Homo erectus. Now, these activities required increasingly complex gestural, mimetic and vocal communication. So, that is how language was invented, because once you, so the bottom line is similar, that because language arose as a tool, because humans had to cooperate, humans had to innovate, expand, because they were not anymore, because they were using tools now. So, that means there were different kinds of skills that were developing. Not everybody would have been having the same skill, just as it is today. One might be good at something, another person might be good at something else. So, communication was key to cooperation in the society in order to make it thrive. So, that is the bottom line both Everett and Pagel share. So, but in his case timeline is slightly older. So, humans invented language to plan, share knowledge and maintain social cohesion. That is how he puts it. His argument, Everett strongly disagrees with the nativists. So, nativists say that language is something that that is innate and that arose suddenly. So, the nativists' primary argument in this regard is based on the discovery of FOXP2 gene, which was connected to language ability. So, they say that once somewhere in the evolutionary stages FOXP2 gene suddenly appeared and there was a sudden mutation, because of it humans started speaking suddenly. So, all of these things happened suddenly. This is called saltationism. So, saltationists believe that language appeared suddenly. Nativists are part of the same broader group. But Everett's idea is that it is not, that is not how it happened, because of course, FOXP2 has been found in many other animals as other ancestors as well, and he says that language is actually a cultural tool, and because of which it had to develop gradually, it could not have developed one fine day. So, this is how he puts it. So, he claims that nativists claim that language emerged suddenly. He views language as evolving gradually rather than as a sudden break in human experience. So, instead he argues that language developed as a cultural invention deeply rooted in social interaction and survival needs. That is how he put it. Evolution of symbolic communication also. So, language is considered the greatest technology. Both of them agree on this, that this is actually a technology. And he uses the word invention not as as a metaphor, but to describe technology emerging from a culture rather than some single individual. So, in the invention, typically in today's world we think of invention as a invention by a single person, some scientist or something like that, but he says that this was a culturally motivated invention. So, the group as a group, this was a cultural invention rather than an individual invention. So, that is something that both of them agree. However, there are some small points of disagreement here and there, but largely Everett and Pagel, they agree. He also talks about literacy, that in some cases literacy does seem to have a role to play. Significantly, sometimes it contributes to language complexity, allowing for editing and construction for more intricate sentences, but this might be relevant for some cultures and not so much for other cultures. So, there are some that is this idea, there used to be, this was to be popular before, but not anymore, that the natural societies, we talked about nature versus culture. So, natural societies, the languages from those societies are actually simple, because they are not so cultured, they are not so sophisticated, the language is simple. But eventually a lot of anthropological and ethnographic work has shown that many of these languages of the so called natural groups or not so sophisticated groups actually have a very complex language. So, one of the examples that Everett also gives is that of Piraha. That is the language in which he has worked. He has spent decades working on Piraha language. So, he gives this example to show that sometimes many unwritten languages also have highly complex grammar. Some languages might have highly complex sound system, some might be having complexity in grammatical system, but complexities are there in this kind of languages as well. So, Piraha has simple syntax, but incredibly complex morphology. In fact, this is exactly the study on the basis of which he has challenged Chomsky, that recursion, which is considered to be a universal feature of all languages proposed by Chomsky, Piraha does not have that feature. So, he says that these certain features are actually not universal. Had it been universal, even Piraha would have. Piraha is an Amazon, this is spoken in Amazon rainforest by a small group of people, group of, it is a community called Pirahas. So, the language and the group both are called. So, this is also a language which is highly complex, though syntax is simple, morphology is very, very complex. We can sum up Everett's contribution by saying that he proposes language as a technology of symbol use, was invented by Homo erectus, and as a result of their unique cognitive abilities and the complex cultural demands for their survival. So, these two are same between him and Mark Pagel. Just the agreement is there is no agreement on which group actually invented, but the necessity, the motivation were the same. So, for example, sophisticated tool making, organized settlements and seafaring, all of these as humans were developing, more and more tools, they have started to have broader domain of usage. All of these required language, and hence the language came up within the human species. So, these are the two important scholars. Now, we will quickly look at the social origin of language workshop. This happened in 2011, University College London, in the Department of Anthropology. It brought together linguists, psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, biologists, you name it, all scholars from various multiple myriad disciplines came together, and they had a small but intensive workshop named the social origin of language. So, this is the result of that conference workshop was they came up with the social origin theory of language. Now, there are multiple theories about the evolution of language. There are the gestural theory, the vocal theory, the music theory, cultural theory, then the saltationist theory, all kinds of theories are there. But here our focus is social origin. So, traditional approaches like Chomsky's, like saltationist view as I was just talking about, they have focused on language as an internal cognitive system separate from society and culture. However, this view sidelines the social and cooperative dimensions of the that are crucial for explaining how language could have emerged and stabilized across human groups. So, this is one problem where the nativists or the saltationists do not have a very good answer. So, this creates because of this there is a problem of continuity versus discontinuity, because humans and chimpanzees share large amount of genetic structure. We are very similar to chimpanzees, very minor differences, but even then we speak, they do not. So, how did it happen? This saltationists do not have a very good answer there. So, the Chomskyan view sees language as genetic endowment, a computational system in the brain which we are hardwired, we are bioprogrammed to speak, largely independent of social context. This is the result of FOXP2 gene. Because of the genetic mutation we started speaking. Society and culture and our cooperation has nothing to do with that. But the other side of the debate says that language and gene, so gene and culture co-evolved. There was a co-evolution of gene and culture. So, one of the most important names in this domain, there are many of course, we have added quite an exhaustive reference at the end. Please look up, this debate has been very interesting and it has been going on for some time now, with latest findings, genetics and multiple other domains also giving their data. So, they argue that language did not emerge suddenly from a genetic mutation, but through a process of gene culture co-evolution. So, there are geneticists who also believe in the gene culture co-evolution, it is not just the nativists. So, where social and cultural dynamics played a very important role. So, behavioral, we think that genetic structures have nothing to do with anything that is outside of it, but that is not true. In today's time, the findings in genetics as well as other disciplines, they show that behavioral and cultural changes often precede genetic changes. There are very interesting studies. For example, the very fact that adult humans can consume and digest milk is also something that has gone from epigenetics to genetics. So, from the environment, for your lifestyle, cultural practices, and eventually your genetic structure adopts that kind of thing or adapts to the demands of the society. So, that is actually what happens. So, this is the same idea that they are also talking about. So, behavioral and cultural changes preceding the genetic changes, that is what the idea is. So, hence they argue that behavioral cultural changes often come first, followed by these genetic changes. So, among the scholars, it is accepted fact that multiple factors were involved in the evolution of language, and society is one such factor. So, society cannot be kept out of it. Similarly, there are other points, for example, they talk about language and social as a social and communal object, something that we have been talking about both with respect to Pagel and Everett. So, language is not like a stereoscopic vision, which is purely biological adaptation of an individual, that is Pinker's point of view. It is inherently a collective communicative technology. So, as you can see, all of these scholars, they agree on one important factor about language, that it has to have a social origin. There is a necessity, collective necessity, and there was a collective answer to that necessity. So, all of these scholars also put the same idea in that workshop. So, shared trust, cooperation, cultural tradition for stability and transmission across generation, all of these necessitated the invention of language. Similarly, other ideas were also proposed. For example, precondition for language is cooperation and trust, use of symbolism among humans, which is something again both Everett and Bagel have also talked about. Social and ritual foundations of symbolism. There is this well known model, was two-stage model, that was also talked about, discussed in that. Language as a biocultural niche, where biology and culture they interact with each other, and language plays an important role in both. So, this becomes a very significantly it kind of stands out as a significant biocultural niche. Culturally, collective innovation and cultural evolution. So, all of these I have added in the annexure, because otherwise this will be too lengthy, but I have added adequate material in the annexure of these slides. So, you can look up those discussions as well. So, primarily the idea that was agreed upon or proposed was that language emerged not from genes alone, but from cooperation, trust and shared symbolic culture. So, the social origin of language reveal that our most distinctive human capacity, of course, language is a distinctly human capacity that arose through collective innovation, ritual practice and the construction of symbolic niche, not through a simple genetic mutation, but through profound transformation of how we live together. That was the conclusion, that was what the scholars agreed upon, that language, of course, there is a genetic part to it, there is also a neural side to it, but then most important part probably was the social and the cultural basis of creating language, because ultimately humans needed to cooperate to create a successful community. That is how we complete this segment. In the next segment, we will look up some more domains, because language and society interaction have been studied by myriad disciplines. So, we will be able to give you some glimpses of that in the next lecture. Thank you.